Welcome back. You're still tuned into News and Views. The time is 9:32 Central African time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a rather sensitive and very, very contentious topic. The Ghanaian government has begun processes to repatriate hundreds of its citizens from South Africa. This is following growing fears over alleged xenophobic tensions and also alleged harassment targeting foreign nationals. The move comes after disturbing videos and reports that have been circulating online showing confrontations involving foreign-owned shops and community tensions in parts of the country. Ghanaian authorities say they're responding to concerns raised directly by their citizens living in South Africa. But the developments also raising important and very, very sensitive questions, especially here in South Africa. Is the situation being accurately understood across the continent? Is the crisis being, I don't know, quote unquote, blown out of proportion on social media? Figuring the history that South Africa has. You can go back to 2008 to 2007, those very horrendous xenophobic attacks that we saw during that time. And also social media impact that it has had. We know that as much as it's a good source of information, it can also be a platform for a lot of fake news. So we're going to be getting, I think, direct contact, one from Ghana, one from South Africa, to almost get insight on how both people view the situation. And joining us right now is Ghana-based political editor at Asaase Radio and editor of the Source newspaper, Wilberforce Asare. Wilberforce, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really, really appreciate you giving us some time and for chatting to us this morning.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to join your team.
No, the pleasure is all ours. I want to kickstart the conversation with, first and foremost, if you can give, I think most importantly, the South African audience a bit of perspective on how this situation, this story of alleged quote-unquote xenophobic attacks against Ghanaians and other African brothers and sisters is being viewed, particularly from Ghana's point of view, and what has triggered such serious concern from Ghanaian authorities. I think the Ghanaians have been very, very vocal when it comes to condemning what we are seeing unfolding in parts of South Africa, even going as far as, calling the South African government to be questioned by the African Union. Just give us insight. How is Ghana viewing the situation?
So what I can tell you is that the media in Ghana actively follows every development in South Africa. And because of the active following of developments in South Africa by the Ghanaian media, the reports of xenophobic attacks had featured very prominently in newspapers, radio stations, and television news coverage across the length and breadth of Ghana. And so the issue of xenophobic attacks, which came up recently, and also previous xenophobic attacks, have received a lot of attention in Ghana and has attracted the attention of those in government and those in power to attempt to do something about the development. We are also very much aware that there are Ghanaians who live in South Africa who have sent SOS messages to the Ghana High Commission in South Africa. And so it is a combination of these developments that have attracted so much attention on recent xenophobic attacks that are allegedly reported to have taken place in South Africa. And so that's what I can tell you about this initial question that you asked me.
When it comes to the announcement that Ghana, will be beginning to repatriate or, have begun repatriation efforts for some of their citizens living in South Africa, how is this, presented? Is it being presented in Ghana as a precautionary measure of some sort or an emergency response that this could be a life or death kind of situation? Because from a South African point of view, I can tell you for free that yes, there have been protests. Yes, there have been, very, very unsavory behavior from some organizations and from some sects of our society. But largely, it hasn't gotten to a point where you can call for an emergency response. And I think it could be granted considering the fact that South Africa historically has set precedents in, having this bad reputation on the African continent when it comes to xenophobic attacks and people essentially being killed because they're not from this country. Is it a precautionary measure to prepare for what might happen, or an emergency response in essence?
Okay, so I think your question is very interesting. And the reason why I smile about your question is because, see, I'm first to admit that our current foreign minister, which is Okujeto Ablakwa, is one person who I think is quite reactionary when it comes to diplomacy and diplomatic politics. And I say he's reactionary because of various things that I have seen him do in the diplomatic space since he became Minister for Foreign Affairs. I think that this issue about xenophobic attacks is one of such incidents where I think he's being quite reactionary. And the reason why I say that is because I saw his communications to the African Union asking that xenophobic attacks in South Africa should be one of the issues to be discussed in the African Union summit, which is coming off next month. Now, these kind of attacks happen every time and everywhere on the African continent. As we speak now, there are various attacks that are taking place in various African countries against African nationals that has not got a name like the one in South Africa has got, which is xenophobic attacks. And so, yes, I agree that our foreign minister is usually reactional, and this is one of the places where I think he's being overreactional and also acting in a very perhaps extreme manner. But I also need to tell you that locally here in Ghana, there are political currency and political undertones to everything that the current government does. And for everything that is done, there must be a political benefit. And so I believe that it is the political currency and the political undertones that is informing some of the actions and inactions of the current foreign minister in order to gain political favor, that the government is doing something about its nationals who may be distressed in another country. There are several of these Ghanaians who live in South Africa who I don't think would like to come to Ghana because they probably do not have any life in Ghana. And so you may want to bring them to Ghana, but they may not want to come to Ghana. Again, I've also seen that the president's brother in recent time has organized a whole ceremony presenting some amount of money in excess of about $20,000 to a man who is purported to have come from South Africa as a result of these xenophobic attacks. And it was a public viewing and a public show of the president's brother giving out this money and taking pictures and putting them out in newspapers and social media platforms and what have you. These political currents and undertones are informing some of the decisions that are being taken. While I say that, I will also not deny the fact that, of course, there are people who have gone through various stress as a result of the recent uprising in your country, as you have alluded. And it is those people who have gone through those stress and their complaints that they have made to the the Ghanaian High Commission in South Africa that perhaps has triggered this overreaction from our current foreign minister. And I choose my words very carefully because I have always had a problem with some of his reactions to diplomatic matters. Diplomatic issues are so sensitive that you don't have to be reactionary. You have to respond sometimes. And that has been my position on the foreign minister.
In essence, Brother Wilberforce, you're telling me and the rest of the continent that there might be a scenario in Ghana at this current moment where South Africa is being used to gain political points internally. That the reputation of South Africa, granted that we've set it for ourselves, is essentially being used to gain political points, and some Ghanaians are falling for it.
Well, so the truth of the matter is that the current administration in our country never does anything without thinking about its political benefits. And I think that it is the bane of most politicians. So for everything that is done, you want to have some political currency out of it and some political gain. And so this might not be an exception. It is perhaps rather the rule when it comes to the way and manner in which politicians do their things. But I'm not in South Africa physically, but I do not think that the reports that we have received is showing that there is so much of a grave concern in South Africa that foreign nationals or foreign countries should be evacuating their foreign nationals. I've not heard any other African country taking that step to say that they are evacuating their foreign nationals from South Africa, except what is being said by the Ghanaian authorities. And so I believe that there is some political currency to gain out of it, and politicians will always exploit political currency. And that is the reason why the president's brother will get involved in such a matter, give out money to somebody and make a public showing of it. Because quite frankly, if you were doing a kind gesture to somebody, why would it require public showing and public viewing? It's a kind gesture. Go ahead and do it. It doesn't need to be in the public domain for everybody to know that you have given out $20,000 to one person who came from South Africa because he was running away from xenophobic attacks. So yes, there is a political currency to gain, and I will not be naive about it as a journalist. I will not be naive about this as an independent political journalist in Ghana.
No, thank you very much for that, because I think it brings a lot into perspective. But is there an understanding of what these kind of gestures ultimately do to diplomatic relations between a country like South Africa and a country like Ghana, which have enjoyed rather, I think, smooth relations for a very, very long time? There's been friends to friends exchanges, business to business exchanges between Ghanaians and South Africans for a very, very long time. And this could be a moment where a dent is put on what was a very, very friendly and fruitful relationship between two countries that love each other when you overlook a lot of things.
Well, yes, and I agree with you that South Africa and Ghana relations has been very, very strong. And right from the days of Nelson Mandela, from when he was president, to President Thabo Mbeki, to all the other presidents that you have had until you have President Cyril Ramaphosa. Ghana's relations with South Africa has been very strong. I believe that there's been all the presidents that we have had in Ghana, equally, from President Rawlings to President Kufuor to President Mills to President Mahama to President Akufo-Addo, under the Fourth Republican Constitution, have all visited South Africa and have had South African leaders visiting them here in Ghana. I remember President Kufuor had a very strong relationship with President Thabo Mbeki. And so, yes, the relationship between Ghana and South Africa is strong. It's not a relationship that is going to be easily broken just because of one incident or one development. But I think that in spite of the strength of the relationship, the kind of diplomatic steps that are taken when issues come are important in order to ensure that the relationship does not break down. And again, I'm thinking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is currently presided over by a South African in the person of Wamkele, and also hosted in Ghana in the Greater Accra region by way of its headquarters. And so even when we started something that was continental, the first person to oversee it was a South African, and it was hosted in Ghana. And so currently we are the host of Wamkele Mene here in Ghana, in Accra, where I am. And so the relationship is strong, it's tight, and you do not have to let such incidents break it apart. I have heard the South African president openly talk about these xenophobic attacks and pledging to do something about its development and its impact on society in South Africa. And so I believe that some of these assurances given by the South African president should have been sufficient to be able to ensure that Ghana does not go beyond its bounds when it comes to this development in South Africa. Here in Ghana, we have had occasions where our indigents attacked people from Nigeria because they were accusing them of taking over their businesses in particular sectors such as the mobile phone accessories sector and all that. We had to do internal mobilization to curb it, because we have a very strong relationship with Nigeria, and we didn't want these internal unrest to destroy the relationship between us and Nigeria. And so I think that that is always the way to go, not to flare up emotions and then do things in an antique manner just to gain political favors and political capital. That I disagree with, and I have a very big issue with.
If you can just indulge me here, and this is my last question. You mentioned something that was very, very well documented. Those run-ins between Nigerians and Ghanaians back in the day. Why do you think, when it comes to South Africa, when you have things like what's currently happening right now, which are protests and people speaking out about, most importantly, illegal immigration into the country, there seems to be a very, very passionate and sometimes even hateful stance towards South Africa, when we're essentially doing what the rest of the continent and the rest of the world has done for ages? Why do you think specifically South Africa gets this bad reputation and people are so loud and quick to condemn when South Africans speak out about what they are facing and their state of the country? I'm asking this because it gets to a very, very dangerous point where it might get violent because South Africans feel like they are not being heard and they are demonized. That's my biggest fear, being in South Africa and seeing what's happening on the streets.
Well, so I can understand your sentiments, but I think that largely this is because of South Africa's own history when it comes to the issue of apartheid. And the reason why I say that is because apartheid is forever and ever on the front burner of South African history and South African politics. And the basis of apartheid is more of white indigenous South Africans, as it were, attacking indigenous black South Africans. And that is what is the foundation of apartheid. Nelson Mandela fought apartheid and made sure that he delivered South Africa out of its quagmire. South Africa has moved on since Nelson Mandela became president, I believe in 95, and stepped down after being president. And South Africa has remained and has developed and has grown. But the history is what is informing the reactions that people come up with as far as xenophobic attacks are concerned, because they think that when the whites were attacking blacks, the whole of Africa joined forces to support you and to get you out of it. So it is bad when you see blacks attacking blacks. And that is how they see the xenophobic attacks. And I'm giving you the street explanation that people have to the issues of xenophobic attacks every time it is heard up in South Africa. So it stems from your history, which is the history of apartheid. And that is why they think that when it gets to the point where, oh, now it is the blacks who are attacking blacks, then people say that, why should it be so? Because we supported you as blacks when you had issues with the whites influencing life in South Africa. So that is really the background, if you ask me. But beyond that, I have seen various kinds of attacks happening all over the world, even in very developed countries. And in recent time, even in the United States of America, there have been concerns about the approach of the US president when it comes to people, particularly from African descent, such that there are people who are from Somalia, who are Somali Americans, who are currently in hiding, because if they do not hide, they risk being arrested and being repatriated or being sent back to their home countries, where some of them have challenges. So yes, the foundation is apartheid, and that is the reason why everything must be done to ensure that the indigenous concerns of the South African people are addressed by your government, so that they do not visit their frustration just on other African nationals who may be innocent about the accusations being leveled against them. But because of the socio-economic challenges that are in the country, it results in some of these reactions that we see whenever xenophobic issues come up in South Africa.
Brother Wilberforce, Asare, Ghana-based political editor. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was very, very important. If there's one thing that you need to know is the fact that South Africa, because of apartheid, largely has been cordoned off and closed off from the rest of the continent. That we really have conversations like the one that you and I are having right now, and it's very, very refreshing to hear what a fellow African in Ghana views South Africa. And I think it's very, very appreciated that you're also sharing the sentiment from the rest of the continent. Really appreciate your time, and I hope we chat again soon.
It was good to talk with you. Thank you very much.
There you go. That was Ghana-based political editor at Asaase Radio and editor of the Source newspaper, Wilberforce Asare, giving us insight into how growing concerns around quote-unquote xenophobia and migrant safety in South Africa are being viewed from the Ghanaian perspective. I think this, we can all agree, it remains a very, very deeply sensitive and emotional issue, and one, that needs to be treated as such. I don't think there should be any side which is condemned or told off or be rubbished because of their perspective. I think it's about time that as Africans we reach a certain level of understanding. The rest of the continent understands South Africa, and South Africa understands the rest of the continent, because we're not going anywhere. South Africa is in Africa, and you will have Africans from all across Africa in South Africa, and that will remain the reality. And I think authorities need to come to a point where they don't fail people and they don't turn Africans against each other. Because from what I'm gathering in Ghana, this could be a situation which is quite simple. Politicians in Ghana trying to gain political points, trying to play hero to appease Ghanaians at the expense of South Africa. And also, granted, the leadership of South Africa failing South Africans, and then after that saying Abahambe, making it seem like all of South Africa's issues, rising unemployment, the crime, infrastructure collapse, is all the fault of foreigners coming into the country. So at some point, Africans need to wake up. Our leaders are turning us against each other. And that should be the sentiment that's rising, instead of throwing slurs at each other, calling each other foreigner or xenophobic or this or that. So I think that's a very, very important story to follow, and I think a very, very refreshing conversation there. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, it's hashtag Hajj Diaries.